The Third Man by Graham Greene. 14. Sunday had laid its false peace over Vienna. The wind had dropped and no snow had fallen for 24 hours. All the morning trams had been full, going out to Grinzing, where the young wine is drunk, and to the slopes of snow on the hills outside. Walking over a canal by the makeshift military bridge, Martins was aware of the emptiness of the afternoon. The young were out with their toboggans and their skis, and all around him was the after-dinner sleep of age. A notice board told him that he was entering the Russian zone, but there were no signs of occupation. You saw more Russian soldiers in the inner city than here. Deliberately, he had given Kurtz no warning of his visit. Better to find him out than a reception prepared for him. He was careful to carry with him all his papers, including the laissez-passer of the four powers, that on the face of it allowed him to move freely through all the zones of Vienna. It was extraordinarily quiet over here on the other side of the canal, and a melodramatic journalist had painted a picture of silent terror, but the truth was simply the wider streets, the greater shell damage, the fewer people, and Sunday afternoon. There was nothing to fear, but all the same, in this huge empty space, where all the time you heard your own feet moving, it was difficult not to look behind. He had no difficulty in finding Kurtz's block, and when he rang the bell, the door was opened quickly, as though Kurtz had expected a visitor, by Kurtz himself. "Oh," Kurtz said. "It's you, Mr. Martins." He made a perplexed motion with his hand to the back of his head. Martins had been wondering why he looked so different, and now he knew. Kurtz was not wearing the toupee, and yet his head was not bald. He had a perfectly normal head of hair, cut close. He said, "You would have been better to have telephoned me. You nearly missed me. I was going out. May I come in a moment?" "Of course." In the hall, a cupboard door stood open, and Martin saw Kurtz's overcoat, his raincoat, a couple of soft hats, and hanging sedately on a peg, like a wrap, Kurtz's toupee. He said, "I'm glad to see your hair has grown," and saw in the mirror on the cupboard door the hatred flame and brush on Kurtz's face. When he turned, Kurtz smiled at him like a conspirator and said vaguely, "It keeps the head warm." "Whose head?" Martins asked, for it had suddenly occurred to him how useful the toupee might have been on the day of the accident. "Never mind," he went quickly on, for his errand was not with Kurtz. "I'm here to see Harry." "Harry?" "I want to talk to him." "Are you mad?" "I'm in a hurry, so let's assume that I am. Just make a note of my madness. If you should see Harry, or his ghost, let him know that I want to talk to him. A ghost isn't afraid of a man, is it? Surely it's the other way round. I'll be waiting in the Prater by the big wheel for the next 2 hours. If you can get in touch with the dead, hurry." He added, "Remember, I was Harry's friend." Kurtz said nothing, but somewhere in a room off the hall somebody cleared his throat. Martins threw open a door and had half expected to see the dead rise yet again, but it was only Dr. Winkler who rose from a kitchen chair in front of the kitchen stove and bowed very stiffly and correctly with the same celluloid squeak. "Dr. Winkle?" Martins said. Dr. Winkler looked extraordinarily out of place in a kitchen. The debris of a snack lunch littered the kitchen table, and the unwashed dishes consorted very ill with Dr. Winkler's cleanness. "Winkler," the doctor corrected him with stony patience. Martin said to Kurtz, "Tell the doctor about my madness. He might be able to make a diagnosis and remember the place. By the great wheel, or do ghosts only rise by night?" He left the flat. For an hour he waited, walking up and down to keep warm. Inside the enclosure of the great wheel, the smashed Prater, with its bones sticking crudely through the snow, was nearly empty. One stall sold thin flat cakes like cartwheels, and the children queued with their coupons. A few courting couples would be packed together in a single car of the wheel and revolve slowly above the city, surrounded by empty cars. As the car reached the highest point of the wheel, the revolutions would stop for a couple of minutes, and far overhead the tiny faces would press against the glass. Martins wondered who would come for him. Was there enough friendship left in Harry for him to come along, or would a squad of police arrive? It was obvious from the raid on Anna Schmidt's flat that he had a certain pull. And then, as his watch hand passed the hour, he wondered, was it all an invention of my mind, Are they digging up Harry's body now in the central cemetery? Somewhere behind the cake stall, a man was whistling, and Martins knew the tune. He turned and waited. Was it fear or excitement that made his heart beat, or just the memories that tune ushered in? For life had always quickened when Harry came just as he came now, as though nothing much had happened. Nobody had been lowered into a grave or forced with cutthroat, or found with cutthroat in a basement. Came with amused, depreciating, take it or leave it a bit. Came with his amused, depreciating, take it or leave it manner, and of course one always took it. Harry? Hello, Rollo. Don't picture Harry Lyme as a smooth scoundrel. He wasn't that. The picture I have of him in my files is an excellent one. He is caught by a street photographer with his stocky legs apart, big shoulders a little hunched, a belly that has known too much good food for too long on his face, a look of cheerful rascality, a geniality, a recognition that his happiness will make the world's day. Now he didn't make the mistake of putting out a hand that might have been rejected, but instead just patted Martins on the elbow and said, "How are things?" We've got to talk, Harry, of course. Alone. We couldn't be more alone than here. He had always known the ropes, and even in the smashed pleasure park, he knew them. Tipping the woman in charge of the wheel so that they might have a car to themselves, he said, "Lovers used to do this in the old days, but they haven't the money to spare, the poor devils, now." And he looked out the window of the swaying, rising car at the figures diminishing below with what looked like genuine commiseration. Very slowly on one side of them the city sank. Very slowly on the other the great cross girders of the wheel rose into sight. As the horizon slid away, the Danube became visible, and the piers of the Riechbruck lifted above the houses. "Well," Harry said, "it's good to see you, Rollo. I was at your funeral." "That was pretty smart of me, wasn't it?" "Not so smart for your girl. She was there too, in tears." "She's a good little thing," Harry said. "I'm very fond of her. I didn't believe the police when they told me about you." Harry said, "I wouldn't have asked you to come if I'd known what was going to happen, but I didn't think the police were on to me." "Were you going to cut me in on the spoils?" "I've never kept you out of anything, old man, yet." He stood with his back to the door as the car swung upwards and smiled back at Rollo Martins, who could remember him in just such an attitude in a secluded corner of the school quad, saying, "I've learned a way to get out at night. It's absolutely safe. You are the only one I'm letting in on it." For the first time, Rollo Martins looked back through the years without admiration as he thought, "He's never grown up." Marlowe's devils wore squibs attached to their tails. Evil was like Peter Pan. It carried with it the horrifying and horrible gift of eternal youth. Martin said, "Have you ever visited the children's hospital? Have you seen any of your victims?" Harry took a look at the toy landscape below and came away from the door. "I never feel quite safe in these things," he said. He felt the back of the door with his hand, as though he were afraid it might fly open and launch him into that iron-ribbed space. "Victims?" he asked. "Don't be melodramatic, Rollo. Look down there." He went on, pointing through the window at the people moving like black flies at the base of the wheel. "Would you really feel any pity if one of those dots stopped moving forever? If I said you can have £20,000 for every dot that stops, would you really, old man, tell me to keep my money without hesitation? Or would you calculate how many dots you could afford to spare? Free of income tax, old man, free of income tax." He gave his boyish conspiratorial smile. "It's the only way to save nowadays." "Couldn't you have stuck to tires?" "Like cooler? No, I've always been more ambitious." "You are finished now. The police know everything." "But they can't catch me, Rollo. You'll see. I'll pop up again. You can't keep a good man down." The car swung to a standstill at the highest point of the curve, and Harry turned his back and gazed out the window. Martins thought, "One good shove, and I could break the glass." And he pictured the body falling through the iron struts, a piece of carrion dropping among the flies. He said, "You know the police are planning to dig up your body. What will they find?" "Harbin," Harry replied with simplicity. He turned away from the window and said, "Look at the sky." The car had reached the top of the wheel and hung there motionless, while the stain of the sunset ran in streaks over the wrinkled papery sky beyond the black girders. Why did the Russians try to take Anna Schmidt? She had false papers, old man. Who told them? The price of living in the zone, Rollo, is service. I have to give them a little information now and then. I thought perhaps you were just trying to get her here, because she was your girl, because you wanted her, Harry smiled. I haven't all that influence. What would have happened to her? Nothing very serious. She'd have been sent back to Hungary. There's nothing against her, really. A year in a labor camp, perhaps. She'd be infinitely better off in her own country than being pushed around by the British police. She hasn't told them anything about you. She's a good little thing, Harry repeated with satisfaction and pride. She loves you. Well, I gave her a good time while it lasted. And I love her. That's fine, old man. Be kind to her. She's worth it. I'm glad. He gave the impression of having arranged everything to everybody's satisfaction. And you can help to keep her mouth shut. Not that she knows anything that matters. I'd like to knock you through the window. What do you want, old man? Our quarrels never last long. Remember that fearful one in Monaco when we swore we were through? I'd trust you anywhere, Rollo. Kurth tried to persuade me not to come. But I know you. Then he tried to persuade me to, arrange an accident. He told me it would be quite easy in this car. Except that I'm the stronger man. But I've got the gun. You don't think a bullet wound would show when you hit that ground? Again, the car began to move, sailing slowly down until the flies were recognizable human beings. What fools we are, Rollo, talking like this, as if I'd do that to you or you to me. He turned his back and leaned his face against the glass. One thrust. How much do you earn in a year with your westerns, old man? 1,000. Taxed? I earn 30,000 free. It's the fashion. In these days, old man, nobody thinks in terms of human beings. Governments don't, so why should we? They talk of people in the proletariat, and I talk of the mugs. It's the same thing. They have their 5-year plans, and so have I. You used to be a Catholic. Oh, I still believe, old man, in God and mercy and all that. I'm not hurting anybody's soul by what I do. The dead are happier dead. They don't miss much here, poor devils, he added with that odd touch of genuine pity as the car reached the platform and the faces of the doomed to be victims. The tired, pleasure-hoping Sunday faces peered in at them. I could cut you in, you know. It would be useful. I have no one left in the inner city. Except Kula and Winkler. You really mustn't turn policeman, old man. They passed out of the car, and he put his hand again on Martin's elbow. That was a joke. I know you won't. Have you heard anything of old Bracer recently? I've had a card at Christmas. Those were the days, old man. Those were the days. I've got to leave you here. We'll see each other sometime. If you are in a jam, you can always get me at Kurtz's. He moved away, and turning, waved his hand. He had had the tact not to offer. It was like the whole past moving off under a cloud. Martin suddenly called after him, "Don't trust me, Harry!" But there was too great a distance now between them for the words to carry. And that is the end of chapter 14.